So Kevin, how would you explain the investment opportunity that Vietnam represents?
For those who are unfamiliar with Vietnam, the country is the 13th or 14th largest in the world by population. We have seen over the last 5 or 6 years a dramatic move up the value chain, as it were. So, 6 years ago, the two major export earners for Vietnam were crude oil and garments and footwear, and there was no such thing as electronics on the export menu, if you like. But over the past 6 years, there's been a huge move into the electronics sector, to the extent that, for example, Samsung assemble somewhere around 50% of their global smartphone production in Vietnam. And represent on their own about 20% of Vietnam's total exports, which sounds a very high number, but compares with roughly 17% of Korea's total exports. So it's not out of whack. We have seen really only over the past year, or slightly less perhaps, a sudden improvement in Vietnam's global profile, so that we now have a stock market which has, over the past year, seen approximately 3 times the daily turnover that we were at the beginning of 2017. So, as people are becoming more familiar with the stories, they're becoming more familiar with Vietnam appearing in the global media. So we're seeing a lot more interest in the country than we have done in the past, and we have one of the fastest growing economies in the world at 6.8% last year, likely to be similar again this year. We have a stable currency. We have a trade surplus now, whereas a decade ago we had trade deficits. And so we're really on a similar path to China, but probably 15 or 20 years behind it, where the country attracts foreign direct investment in order to modernise and industrialise the economy, in order to in order to develop into a globalised economy.
And how can a high net worth or ultra high net worth investor access this opportunity?
Well, there are a number of ways of playing the market. I mean, you can come in directly into the market, having opened an account with one of the brokers here, and access the trading code. There are, as elsewhere in the world, various different products, from ETFs to closed and open-ended funds, giving one access to various parts of the Vietnamese or the Vietnamese story, whether it be through listed equity or private equity, bonds, property, and so on. But there are essentially a plethora of ways of becoming involved. There are a large number, for example, of UCITS funds from Luxembourg, particularly, ETFs both locally and offshore. We're a Cayman manager. We manage a couple of funds, both open-ended with monthly liquidity. But as I say, there are many other ways of playing the market, and it really depends on what fits your risk profile, I would suggest.
And Kevin, what are some of the developments we're likely to see over the course of the next few years?
Right. Well, as far as the stock market is concerned, which is all I really know anything about, we have seen a large number of new IPOs, particularly from the private sector, over the last 9 months to a year. That seems to be continuing at the moment, or this week they've just closed the largest ever IPO in Techcombank, which is one of the private commercial banks. Also coming, we're told, is Vin Homes, which is a subsidiary of Vin Group, the biggest property developer in the country. And there's a whole list of government SOEs which will be sold off over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, I imagine. Vietnam has a very determined aim to become an MSCI emerging market index component rather than MSCI frontier. In order for that to happen, we need to see an increase in the accessibility of the market, because we still have foreign ownership limits which need to be relaxed in order for MSCI to treat Vietnam as a serious contender for such a redesignation. But we see, a continuation of the development of the market in terms of, hopefully in terms of openness, but also certainly in terms of size as more and more companies come to the market. And we expect that to continue. And certainly the amount of interest that we've seen from ever larger global international institutions, as long as that continues, then we're set fairly well for a continuation, I would think.
And do you think there are any sectors or strategies that represent special value today?
Well, we're a fundamental research-driven bottom-up investor. We're non-sectoral or sectorally agnostic, if you prefer, and we try to pick the best available companies and best available listed companies in Vietnam from a long-term perspective, and that obviously includes us being, from a qualitative perspective, happy with the management and the style of management, the consistency and transparency of management, and the amount of notice they pay, due notice that they pay to minority interests and other forms of corporate governance. So there's nothing sectorally that we particularly go for, but we have over the last year we've been particularly keen on the better brokers in the country, because in a bull market, a high beta high beta exposure to a developing, growing market. And as I say, we've seen average daily turnover triple in the past year. So the brokers have obviously benefited from that. But as I say, across the market, one of the major themes has been the recovery of the banking sector during the past year or so. We have very little exposure to banks now, although we have participated in the Techcombank IPO. But other than that, our biggest holding for the last 15 years has been Vinamilk, and as long as that continues to be the best quality or the highest quality company in the country, I'm sure that we'll continue to own that.